This is the hottest point in the niche right now. Videos on this topic are getting 4.33 million views in just a few days. A post on Reddit received 7,268 upvotes, 30,000 letters of protest, and today we're going to talk about the single greatest miscarriage of justice in the entire history of the wizarding world. Not the darkest, not the most violent, the most unjust, because there is a difference, and that difference matters. His name is Sirius Black, and everything you think you know about him is wrong. Let me start with a number: 12. 12 years. That is how long an innocent man spent in Azkaban prison, in a cell 8 feet across, without a trial, without a hearing, without a single person in a position of authority asking the one question that would have changed everything. 12 years in conditions that the wizarding world itself describes as a fate worse than death. 12 years in the company of creatures whose entire biological function is to drain joy, hope, and sanity from every living thing within range. And here is the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Nobody put him there by mistake. The system worked exactly as it was designed to work. Sirius Black was arrested, transported, imprisoned, and forgotten, and every single step of that process followed procedure. The paperwork was filed, the charges were recorded, the sentence was assigned. The Ministry of Magic looked at the situation and said, yes, this is correct, this is how it should be. Move on. That is not a malfunction. That is the system operating at full capacity. So today we are not just talking about Sirius Black. We are talking about what his case reveals about the world that produced it. Because if you understand what happened to Sirius Black on the night of the 1st of November 1981, you understand something that the books only show you in fragments, something Rowling never states directly but builds into every scene, every institution, every ministry corridor. You understand that the wizarding world is not a world of justice with occasional failures. It is a world of power with occasional justice. And the difference is everything. Let me take you back to the beginning, the 1st of November 1981. Sirius Black arrives at Godric's Hollow. He does not apparate directly to the door. He arrives nearby and walks the last stretch, the way you do when you are afraid of what you are about to find. He has already heard, through channels he will never explain to anyone because he will never be asked, that something has happened, that Voldemort came, that the cottage was attacked. He walks up the path and the front door is standing open. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it means to walk toward a door that should be closed and is not. Think about what that open door represents. Not just the physical object, but everything behind it. Think about what Sirius Black, who has known James and Lily Potter since he was 11 years old, who is godfather to their son, who slept on James's floor the summer he ran away from home at 16. Think about what that open door means to him as he stands on the path in the cold November night and looks at it. He goes in anyway. We do not need to know exactly what he found. Rowling does not tell us, and we should not ask. What we know is what came next. He found Harry alive in the rubble of the upper floor, crying unharmed. He found what remained of the people he loved most. And then he heard Hagrid's motorbike on the path outside, and he made a decision. He gave Harry to Hagrid. He gave away the one person he could have kept, the one person who connected him to everything he had lost. He took the motorbike, his own motorbike, the one he had lent Hagrid, and he left, and the direction he left in tells you everything you need to know about where his mind was in that moment. He did not go to Dumbledore, he did not go to the Ministry, he did not find Remus Lupin, who was the only other person left who would have understood. He went to find Peter Pettigrew, because Sirius Black, standing in the ruins of the cottage where his best friend had just been murdered, had already done the mathematics. He knew who the secret keeper was. He had known it for months. And he understood with the terrible clarity of a man who has spent 7 years training as an aura and 2 years fighting a war, exactly what the knowledge meant. Peter had told Voldemort where the Potters were hiding. There was no other explanation. There was no other person who could have done it. The Fidelius charm is not a charm that can be broken from outside. The secret cannot be extracted by force, cannot be tortured out of the caster, cannot be found by any spell or enchantment. The only way Voldemort could have known where James and Lily were living was if Peter chose to tell him. And Peter, small and pale and always slightly breathless Peter who had cried at the wedding, Peter had chosen. Sirius found him the next morning on a street in Yorkshire, and here is where the story becomes something else entirely. Here is where it stops being a tragedy and starts being an indictment. Peter Pettigrew, cornered on a street in broad daylight with Sirius Black 3 feet away and closing, made one move. One move, and it was the right one. And it was a move that only works in a world where the system will do what you expect it to do. Peter turned to the muggles on the street, a crowd of ordinary people with no knowledge of any of this, and he screamed. He screamed that Sirius Black was a murderer. He screamed it loud enough for witnesses, and then while Sirius stood there absorbing the shock of the accusation, Peter cut off his own finger, dropped it on the pavement, cast a single spell, and transformed a rat. One small brown rat running for the nearest drain. And on the street in Yorkshire, 12 muggles lay dead from the explosion, and Sirius Black was standing in the middle of the debris, and the auras arrived 3 minutes later, and that was that. Let me ask you something. How long do you think the interrogation lasted? The answer is, we do not know, because there was no interrogation, there was no trial, there was no hearing before the Wizengamot, no presentation of evidence, no defense counsel, no examination of the scene, no inquiry into the nature of the spell that caused the explosion, no analysis of the magical residue, no attempt to establish whether the wand they confiscated had fired the curse that killed 12 people. None of that happened. The Ministry of Magic looked at a street full of dead muggles and a Death Eater standing in the middle of them and processed the paperwork. Sirius Black was sent to Azkaban without a trial. Say that again, slowly. Without a trial. In a justice system that is presumably a justice system in a world with courts and laws and official procedures, and a Minister for Magic and a Department of Magical Law Enforcement. A man was arrested, charged with murder, and with the betrayal of the Potters to Voldemort, and imprisoned for life. And nobody stood up in any official capacity and said, "Wait, let us hear from the accused." Nobody said, "Wait, why not?" This is the question the books do not ask directly. And it is the most important question in the entire case. Why did nobody ask to hear from Sirius Black? The answer has several layers, and each layer is worse than the one before it. The first layer is the simplest. The war had just ended. Voldemort was gone. Everyone was celebrating. The wizarding world had spent 2 years in a state of absolute terror. People disappearing, families destroyed, nobody safe, nobody certain that the person next to them at the ministry canteen was not a Death Eater or an informant. And then, overnight, it was over. Voldemort was gone, the curse had rebounded, the danger had passed. People wanted to close the chapter. They wanted to believe that the right people were in prison, that justice had been done, that it was finished. Sirius Black, standing on a street full of dead muggles, was a very convenient piece of punctuation at the end of a terrible story. The second layer is more uncomfortable. Sirius Black came from the House of Black. He came from a family so thoroughly associated with dark magic, with pure-blood supremacy, with Voldemort's cause, that the very name was a form of evidence. His mother had blasted him off the family tree for befriending James Potter and becoming a Gryffindor, but the Blacks were what they were, and the wizarding world knew exactly what they were. When the Aurors arrived on that street and saw who was standing there, they saw a Black before they saw a man. They saw a surname before they saw a situation. The third layer is the most damning. Albus Dumbledore knew that Sirius Black had proposed changing the Secret Keeper. He did not know at that point that the change had been made. He did not know that Peter had taken on the role. But he knew that Sirius had suggested it, and he had advised against it, and his advice had not been followed. And when Voldemort found the Potters, Dumbledore's first assumption, the assumption of the most powerful wizard of the age, the man with more information than anyone else in the country, was the same as everyone else's. He assumed it was Sirius, and if Dumbledore assumed it, the case was closed before it was opened. Now let us talk about Azkaban itself. Because the trial is one failure, and it is a catastrophic failure, but the prison is a different category of problem altogether. Azkaban sits off the coast of Scotland on an island of grey rock in the North Sea, and it is guarded not by human wardens but by Dementors. 100 and more Dementors stationed permanently throughout the corridors and on the perimeter, whose presence makes sustained, rational thought functionally impossible for anyone confined within range. Think about what that means for the project of justice. A trial, if it happens before a person goes in. Once a person goes in, the possibility of revisiting the case, of gathering new evidence, of hearing new testimony, of the accused themselves articulating their innocence, all of that becomes vanishingly unlikely, because the process of simply surviving Azkaban requires every cognitive and psychological resource a person possesses. You are not thinking about appeals. You are not drafting letters. You are holding yourself together against the accumulated weight of every worst memory you have ever had, playing on continuous rotation with no interval and no relief. Sirius Black survived 12 years of this. He survived because he knew something that nobody else in Azkaban knew, and that knowledge was the one thing the Dementors could not reach. Not because Dementors are unable to drain it. They can drain anything given enough time. But because the knowledge was not a feeling. It was not hope or joy or love, the things that Dementors target and destroy. It was a fact, cold and hard and specific. He was innocent. Peter was alive. He held on to that fact the way a drowning man holds onto a plank. Not because it is comfortable, not because it gives warmth, but because it is the only solid thing available, and without it there is nothing. He transformed into his animagus form to survive the worst of it. As a dog, the Dementor effect was diminished, not eliminated, but reduced to something closer to profound sadness, rather than active psychological destruction. He spent years in a cell as a large black dog, lying on the stone floor, holding on to the one true thing he still possessed. James was dead. Lily was dead. Peter was alive, and Peter was the reason. Let us talk about what the case required. What would it have taken in the immediate aftermath of the arrest to establish the truth? Not much. Not nearly as much as the 12 years that followed. It would have taken one conversation, one person with the authority to demand a hearing standing up and saying, "Before we send this man to Azkaban, we are going to let him speak." That person was Dumbledore. Dumbledore, who knew the Fidelius charm had been used. Dumbledore, who knew that Sirius had proposed changing the Secret Keeper. Dumbledore, who had more political capital in the immediate aftermath of Voldemort's fall than any other person in the country, because he had predicted it and resisted it, and ultimately, through channels he never fully explained, been part of ending it. If Dumbledore had walked into the Ministry on the 2nd of November 1981 and said, "I want to hear from Sirius Black before this goes any further," the Ministry would have complied. He did not do that. There are reasons to understand why he did not. The situation was chaotic. He was dealing with the aftermath of the attack, with placing Harry, with the collapse of the Resistance network, with a dozen urgent priorities, and he had, in his own mind, already reached a conclusion about what had happened based on the information available to him. He was wrong, and he was wrong in a way that cost a man 12 years of his life. But the wrongness was not malicious. It was the wrongness of a brilliant man moving too fast in a crisis, trusting his own deductions over the evidence, failing to ask one more question. The cost of that failure is 12 years in Azkaban. The cost of that failure is a boy who grows up without his godfather. The cost of that failure is Remus Lupin spending those 12 years believing that his closest friend had committed the worst imaginable betrayal. The cost of that failure is Peter Pettigrew, living as a rat in the Weasley household for 12 years, feeding on whatever information he could gather, waiting for his master to return. The cost of that failure is a moment in a tunnel under the Whomping Willow in the spring of 1994, when the truth finally comes out and it is too late, and Pettigrew escapes again, and the cycle continues. Every single one of those costs flows directly from the failure to hold one hearing on the 2nd of November, 1981. Here is the question I want you to sit with. Sirius Black walked out of Azkaban in the summer of 1993. He escaped. Nobody in the history of the prison had ever done it before, and the fact that he managed it tells you everything about the state of mind he was in after 12 years, focused, determined, holding on to the single thread of purpose that had kept him sane. He escaped. He made it to Hogwarts. He found Peter, and then the system failed him again. In the tunnel, in the presence of Harry and Ron and Hermione and Lupin and Snape, the truth came out. Peter confessed. Not willingly, not completely, but enough that the people in that tunnel understood what had happened, understood who had betrayed the Potters, understood that Sirius Black was innocent. And then Pettigrew escaped, and in the confusion Sirius was captured by the Dementors without the evidence that would have cleared him, and Minister Fudge, rather than ordering an inquiry, ordered the Dementor's kiss. The Ministry was going to destroy his mind before he could be heard. Let me say that one more time. The Minister for Magic, informed that a prisoner had escaped and been recaptured, ordered the Dementor's kiss, the most severe and irreversible penalty the wizarding world possesses, one that renders the recipient permanently incapable of thought or communication. Without any hearing, without any new evidence, without any inquiry into the circumstances of the escape or the accusations the escaped prisoner had been making, Fudge's justification was essentially, he was a criminal before, he is a criminal now. Remove the threat. That is not a justice system. That is a disposal system with legal language written over the top of it. Sirius Black was never cleared. This is the fact that the books present and then move past because the story has other places to go, but it is worth stopping on. He died in the Department of Mysteries in the spring of 1996, still a fugitive, still officially guilty, still carrying in the eyes of the Ministry and the law and the general wizarding public the charge of murdering 12 muggles and betraying the Potters to Voldemort. He died without a trial, without an exoneration, without anyone in official authority ever sitting down with the evidence and saying, "We got this wrong." he spent the last 3 years of his life hiding. He spent them in Grimmauld Place, the house he had fled as a teenager, the house of his mother and her horrible painting and her pure blood obsession, trapped inside by the very fact of his continued official guilt. He spent them being careful, being hidden, being a liability to the people he loved because his presence endangered them. He should have been cleared in the summer of 1993 when Harry and Hermione went back in time and he escaped on Buckbeak. He should have been cleared the moment Dumbledore confirmed what Harry had witnessed in the tunnel. He should have been cleared in the spring of 1994 at the latest, when Voldemort's return was beginning to be suspected by those paying attention, and the question of who had betrayed the Potters was once again relevant. None of that happened because the Ministry at every turn found it more convenient to maintain the official version than to investigate the true one, because Cornelius Fudge and the institution he represented operated on the principle that admitting error is more dangerous than perpetuating it. Because in the wizarding world, as in ours, the gap between justice and power is not an accident, it is a feature. So what does the case of Sirius Black actually tell us? It tells us that in the wizarding world, guilt is established by circumstance and convenience, not by evidence. It tells us that the most powerful protective charm in the magical canon can be rendered meaningless by a single procedural failure. It tells us that a system built on fear, as the Ministry of Magic was during the First War, does not produce justice in the aftermath of that fear. It produces scapegoats and shortcuts, and it calls them closure. It tells us that institutions protect themselves before they protect the people inside them. And it tells us something about Sirius Black himself, which is perhaps the most important thing of all. It tells us that 12 years of Azkaban, 12 years of Dementors, 12 years of isolation and cold, and the worst memories a person can carry, playing over and over in an 8-foot cell, did not break him, did not make him abandon the truth, did not make him accept the version of events that the world had decided was real. He came out of that prison with one thing intact, the knowledge of what had actually happened. He was innocent, Peter was alive, and he was going to find him. That is not a story about magic. That is a story about what a person is made of when everything else has been taken away, when there is nothing left except the choice between accepting a lie and refusing to. Sirius Black for 12 years, in conditions that the wizarding world itself acknowledges as worse than death, refused to. That matters. It matters more than the escape. It matters more than the magic. It matters more than any of the plot mechanics that the story uses to bring the truth eventually to light. The truth came to light because one man held on to it when he had no reason to believe it would ever matter. His name was Sirius Black, and everything you think you know about him is worth thinking again.